Hello, everyone. I am Carmen De Bono, and welcome to our series IL-MALTIN, presented by the Maltese Center of New York, featuring conversations with people who do extraordinary things, from politics to medicine, personalities to professors, artists to writers, each guest sharing his or her experiences and accomplishments and contributions to our community. Our guests today are from the Magna Żmien Foundation in Malta. Andrew Alamango lives in Malta and is a researcher and musician with a profound interest in local and Mediterranean musical heritage, cultural lore, instruments, and musical repertoire. With an MA in archival sciences, he specializes in archival collections and audio recordings related to the socio-political history of Mediterranean cultures and is interested in their dissemination, application, and reinterpretation in the context of music and theater. Andrew has a special interest in making audio collections of historical interest accessible to diverse audiences through publications, performances, public talks, and workshops. And Dr. Andrew Pach, also living in Malta, is an archivist and ethnomusicologist. He has a PhD in ethnomusicology and has spent 10 years researching music and cultural traditions in Maltese communities across Australia, Canada, and the US. He has been employed on archival research and community engagement projects by the British Library, IASA, UNESCO, and works with the Heritage Malta Digitization Department. Andrew manages Magna Zmien's Digitization Studio, delivers workshops and lectures about the organization's archive. Magna Zmien began its work in 2017 as part of Valletta's title of European Capital of Culture 2018, and their work is supported by the Arts Council Malta. Over the past several years, they have digitized and archived what would have been lost footage and memories that are an integral part of our history and identity. Welcome, everyone.
Normally is 35mm film. Black and white in color, but there are also other sizes of negatives. Some interesting types we sometimes find are glass negatives, which I don't know how well you can sort of see, but these are popular from sort of the late 1800s to around the 1930s. And we sometimes find these, and they're extremely delicate, and obviously with dust and sand in the air and humidity, they can scratch. So they're very delicate, but they are very high resolution. So we can blow them up quite large and get a lot of detail out of them. And this is where negatives are really good. We also come across a lot of slides. Obviously, I mean, we're all quite familiar with these sort of objects. And again, despite their size, they're very high resolutions. So we can actually blow them up to quite large. We scan at very high resolution, and we can blow them up to make very large prints, which we have done in exhibitions. For a film, from the earliest film that we regularly come across, so this is 8mm film of these types of reels, right? The earliest we tend to find is around 1950s, although there are some earlier, up back to the 1920s, 1930s, when 8mm film is the 1930s. But in Malta, we find the 1950s, definitely by the 1960s, people have access to this hardware much more than they did before. And we know for sure this is because of the diasporic element. Speaking with a lot of people that we know in Australia or in Canada, people who migrated there would buy equipment and then buy family members back in Malta, and they'd bring some pretty decent, and so you do actually find some quite nice equipment from America, from New York or from Toronto in Malta, and you think, well, I wonder, what's the story even behind the equipment getting back to Malta? So that's quite interesting as well. The most common formats we really do get our film comes in quite a lot, because a negative, well, you can scan at home, or a photograph you can scan at home. You can see what's on it. But on a film reel, you don't know what's on it. If you don't have the technology to play it back, you can't even guess, you know, is this a commercial film that someone bought on 8mm, which of course they were, or is this a family recording? For audio, we find a lot of open reel tape, which is, you know, you'd find in sort of boxes like these, and quite similar to 8mm. They come on reels like this. They come in a variety of sizes. The larger ones like this, you'd often find sort of mixtapes, you know, as we know from like cassettes or CDs or whatever, you know, you create a mixtape from stuff you've recorded off the radio. So that's quite interesting. We have quite a lot of radio broadcasts, but also the length of the larger reels were very useful for recording IL-MALTIN sessions, which is a traditional type of music in Malta, which can last up to sort of 45 minutes to an hour long sometimes. So you can get whole sessions from the 1950s and 60s and 70s being recorded on these. They also made smaller reels, like sort of 3-inch diameter. On those, we found quite a lot of voice messages. Because they were small and quite light, they were easy and relatively cheap to post. So you would get people sending messages to family and friends from Malta to Australia or vice versa. And you'd find these kind of conversations happening over a number of weeks or months, very slow conversations via these messages. Sometimes they're quite generic, and sometimes they can be very personal. They can be someone singing songs to grandchildren who they haven't seen for many years. So they can be quite effective, quite very personal as well. Another format we very rarely find, but does turn up now and then, is these sort of single direct cut discs. So they're like vinyl records, but they're based on cardboard. These are, you'd find like these recording booths on train station platforms, or in the same ways you would find a photo booth, where people would go in and they would record a 1:30 to 2-minute message, and then they would be able to post this because it's very light and it's fairly durable. They'd post it to families. So the few we found of these tend to contain short messages like you'd write on a postcard. I'm in London, I'm visiting so-and-so, I'm sorry I won't be home for Christmas. So these are quite sweet, short little messages. Obviously, they were recorded very much abroad. I mean, the ones we have are from England, but we do know there are some from Detroit and some from New York that are out there as well. So people would send short messages, often around birthdays or Christmas time, as a way of communicating with family. And then obviously audio cassettes from the 70s, 80s, 90s. We find quite a lot of those, as well as VHS tape. Although we don't tend to do a huge amount of VHS because it can just contain so much generic material. I mean, one thing what was nice about the earlier formats was, you know, an 8mm film would be 50 feet. You get about 3.5 minutes footage. So if you went on holiday or something, you might take 1 or 2 reels maximum. So you kind of, you would choose more carefully what you wanted to shoot. And then as time went on and we got closer to the 2000s, you were able to shoot for longer periods of time or record for longer. So you were less selective about what you were saying or what you were filming, because you always thought, oh, well, I can always edit this down later. So that's something that's quite interesting to sort of see over time, particularly through messages or so on, what you choose to capture. So there's quite a lot of sort of academic areas there, which I'm quite interested in personally. But yeah, so over the past 3 years, since 2018, when we really started, I think March 2018 was when we really started to start collecting things. We've gathered around 7,500 images, around 300 8mm films have come in, and about 170 audio tapes or cassettes and reels and so on. And what's been really nice is they've come from 79 different donors. So the response we've had, some people have just given us 10 photos, others have given us a book of, thousands of negatives. So kind of the variety of people who've wanted to engage with this has been really encouraging. And as Andrew said, the type of content ranges from family milestones like engagements, weddings, christenings, a baby's uchiya, when they put the objects in front of them and they choose them. So over time, you look at, well, what objects are they putting in front? How's that changing? How's a wedding changing over the decades? There's things of couples going to the beach or the countryside, and families visiting from abroad. And then there's bigger things. So beyond families, so the next level up, there's festa, there's carnival, there's music performances, whether it's traditional music or popular music, which is quite little documented. Live gigs in Malta in the 80s and 90s they exist only on home VHS recordings or cassette tapes that are recorded. There's no place to go to get this stuff. We've also found oral history interviews where people have donated. One academic gave us a collection of recordings from Toronto in the 90s. And we've also found professional photography from artists who were unknown. One of our exhibitions this year was on just such a collection by Guido Stillon. And that's on our website as well if you want to have a look. But there's also things like dialects, how language has changed. We've certainly captured people's dialects on these recordings, that ways of saying words or words or phrases or sayings that maybe aren't captured anywhere else. So there's quite a lot to dig there as well. And also observing relationships between different generations of people. So, what comes in on these collections is such a variety, and whatever artists or curators or researchers we work with, there's a million different approaches that they could take or that they could want to pull from these collections. And they all offer alternative narratives. As Andrew had said, there isn't a national institution in Malta that collects these sort of things because it's just not really within their remit. People's weddings, why a National Archives or the National Library, it's not something that they would collect unless it was related to a significant person or a significant event from a national perspective. There's just not the resources to handle that. So this is where we kind of fit in to kind of gather all of that stuff. But also a lot of this material can offer an alternative perspective, whether it's home footage or photographs of independence in 1964, but you're in the crowd. Your view is different to the official photographer or the official videographer from PBS or whoever in Malta. That alternative perspective can give you something that the official narrative doesn't. So, we just believe every perspective is important to understand our history and our experiences, and that's what we're trying to do as well, trying to capture a balance. I think for next year, this year, as everywhere, we have been digitizing and we have been planning projects and doing little bits and pieces, but since February, March, there just hasn't been as much going on, but we have been continuing to digitize. But next year will be a bit more settled. We're moving to a studio complex in Valletta, the Valletta Design Cluster, which is being set up as a hub for creatives and NGOs like us to kind of work together in this sort of central space where we can, have more collaborations, but also make the public more aware of what we do by being more transparent, right? Having a studio that people can come to visit. We can work specifically with the community in Valletta to invite people in. This transparency is what we're really trying to push, I think, from next year, to make people understand that, we're not a commercial company. We're not doing this for commercial gain. We are a VO, registered as a foundation and so on. And that we're genuinely interested in this material and that we want to make it accessible. So as part of this expansion. You know, we're quite keen to engage with diasporic communities like yours, not only to maybe gather more material, but also to work out how can we kind of plant the Magna Zmien seed in New York to kind of start those conversations happening over there, and see what kind of collaborations could happen in the future. Because we can't really offer you digitization service 3,000 miles away. I mean, there's a limit to our availability and how much we can carry in a suitcase. But maybe there's some crossover points that we can maybe discuss now, and see where we can sort of help each other, I think. I don't know if Andrew wants to say anything else extra, or Carmen wants to jump in.
Well, I want to let everyone who's watching how I found you, how I found Magna Zmien. Before the show started, I was explaining how I had 8mm and Super 8s lying around in the closet for like decades, and staring at them and, you know, just saying, oh, I wonder what's on that, but knowing there must have been something important, because the effort to have this heavy equipment, take it with you and carefully choose what you were going to film. And I knew my father was always very passionate about recording things. I mean, photographs, he was, you know, one of the first in his village to, you know, come back from his travels with a camera and took pictures. And then when the, you know, time came that there was film technology, he got the Super 8s and 8mm. I'm not sure which came first, but you know, he was always documenting kind of everyday things that he enjoyed doing and looking at. So I knew there was something special and on these films, and I realized the importance after many years that, you know, I should really find out what's on this before it's gone or gets destroyed. And I came across one of your projects and kind of delved in more about who are they, what do they do? And I thought I'll give it a try and reached out. I think it was last year that I reached out and said, I've got these films. I have no idea what's on them, or if there's anything worth saving or have any importance to Magna Zmien. So I was fortunate enough that I was able to travel last summer and get the films to them. And over the past year, they were able to digitize them for me. And a beautiful discovery that one of them actually had audio on it of my grandmother, my mother's mother, and touching upon World Migration Day. My mother had migrated to New York and she was one of 15. So my grandmother had children spread across the world, and phone calls were very expensive. I remember my mom writing, you know, letters every week on that, you know, airmail envelope, par avion. And it was like a one-page piece of paper, and then you folded it and it became an envelope. And, you know, growing up in New York, you know, you thought of a phone, hey, you know, it's a phone, why can't they have a phone? And realizing, you know, it was just too expensive to either own a phone or just to make a phone call. And so the film showed that, you know, wow, look, they're trying to stay connected in a live way, even though it was going to be a recording. When my mom would receive that, it was live to her. Even though it was a delayed thing, it was live, and thinking how important it was. And my grandmother saying Happy New Year to her children across the world. And we take advantage of that today. We're just so instant. And this was carefully taken and, you know, carefully thought out. And all her children who were in Gozo were with her in the living room and having that connection. And I realized, you know, the importance of my Maltese identity and that migration being documented, even if it was just that 3-minute clip that Magna Zmien discovered for me. I I cherish it. And I'm glad to be a part of the project and hope that, you know, it contributes to something more as a larger community of Maltese heritage and identity. So I just want people to understand why we should care about this and why we should participate in this.
It would be nice to hear from some people in the audience, actually, and just get their perceptions, why they're here, and as you've been saying, that there's many reasons why there's this need to collect. You know, there's this urgency, the fact that you get content as well, and also the fact that an aspect of this is the reinterpretation of this, you know, rather than keep it in a box and say that was the past and hey, look how pretty. So there's this need to use content as well in new and exciting ways. In fact, we give access to researchers, academic researchers there's a girl who's now, Caroline Tonna actually, is researching 2 or 3 photographic collections post-war period, where she's studying shop facades, shop windows, and fashion in Malta, in post-war Malta, yeah? Through the photography, through the research and all of this. So she's carrying out research on that. So there are different reasons, yes, and then stuff can be put out through exhibitions, through possibly books, through in-performance, music videos. So at the end of the day, we're generating content, you know, and we're also, besides having a foot in the archival processes and work, and the importance of that preservation, the need to use this stuff in creative ways is also a very important aspect. Before I think I go on, I think I'd like to hear from some of the people who are here.
We have Lou who's ready to participate. You can go ahead, Lou.
Thanks. Hey, thanks for that. I really enjoyed it. You know, thinking about my Maltese heritage is something that I don't do, let me be frank. But I should, because I come from a bit of a unique situation. Of course, this has a lot to do with the archival project that y'all are talking about here. So I am a Torontonian transposed to Iowa. And my dad and mom met in Canada, and they married in Toronto. And my dad, I think it's Carmen, correct? Yeah, my dad, like your dad, Carmen, was, you know, just very keen on recording everything we did in our lives. So we have this archive, which is massive, of 8mm and 16mm of everything, every event in our lives, including my parents' marriage, which is bizarre. I don't know how they managed to get that. But my dad also ran a Maltese variety television show in Toronto for 30 years, which was called IL-MALTIN. And this dude, you know, taped every show, and all those tapes are in our basement in Toronto. I mean, thousands of them, thousands of Maltese variety shows where he would read the news. He would invite a lot of priests from Malta. I mean, my house was teeming with Maltese priests. It was very bizarre. And may have contributed to the fact that I'm now a scholar of religious history. But that notwithstanding, yeah, I have this incredible archive at my home. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it really records the Toronto diaspora from the early 1970s until the early 1990s. And I'd love you guys to get your hands on it if you're interested.
Yes.
Now
I know there's for example in Australia, in Melbourne, there's the SBS network, and they still have a Maltese show. I don't know if it's still running, but up until a few years ago, they had this series. It was once a week, I think, for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and they would have these kinds of things on. I don't know. I'll have to do a Google to see if that collection of yours is also saved somewhere else. I don't know what network it was on.
It was cable television.
Cable.
Yeah, cable television. It was like, you know, I don't know what the equivalent, I don't know if there is an equivalent anywhere else, but, you know, there were a series of films called Wayne's World. That's what my dad's show was like. You know? So just bring in anyone. And he would hold telethons every year to raise money for some kind of orphanage in Malta. Excuse my pronunciation. I think it was called Dar tal Providenza. And so the priests would come in, and it was a 24-hour telethon, and we were all brought together to do the behind the work in the television studio. So I was a cameraman and a director when I was like 14 and 15. I'm sorry I'm sharing all of this with you, but it may be interesting for your archive. And as I'm sorry, I assume, yeah, in any event, your name looks Indri to me.
Yes, it's actually Andrew. It's
Andrew. Indri, isn't
yeah,
that
it's
interesting?
Andrew. Indri is Andrew Maltese.
Okay.
We have to separate our names, otherwise we get confused.
Yeah, I'm a South Asianist, so of course the first thing I think of is Indri in Hindi.
Yes.
But in any event,
yeah.
So I'd love you guys to get this. Fortunately, my dad was also a huge audio video buff, so all the stuff to digitize, he's got all of that equipment downstairs. It's like, you know, the Starship Enterprise in his basement with all sorts of stuff. So if I can get y'all connected, that would be great.
Yes, look, I think that's a great story. It's already in itself, it's a great story. And I haven't seen the content. And I'm sure it is interesting, it is of interest. And as you can see, these are like, this is like another a sphere of Maltese reality, which it's just, I would have never even imagined this. I mean, I would have assumed, but had you not told me, listen, we had this, the show, my dad did pull in this one, and we keep it together, and you got you know, his son to do the camera. It's a great story in itself. Wow.
Yeah. Believe me, you didn't live through it, my friend.
Yeah, and the reasons for doing it, for making a living, but also, you know, it binds a community, and this is why these people were, like you were saying, and like Carmen said as well, you know, when we had the technology in our hands, we also use it to keep our contacts with our diaspora and our cousins. And so we have audio messages, there's reels and reels. We've got hours and hours of people sending messages to each other, saying how they felt when they went to America or Australia, and actually they weren't quite happy with it, and they would have given anything to go back at times, you know. So just general stories of what they could have documented. Now this clearly is a great story in itself. I don't know, again, this is like a preliminary meeting. I don't know how we would go about that, but
well, why don't I send you? What I guess can we connect through your
absolutely
website?
Absolutely, that's the idea. We connect, and we can keep in touch. We can see. You see, this was a great initiative from Carmen's side, because I was always saying, we should go to New York because there's the Maltese there. We should go to Toronto, there's the Maltese there. It's like thinking bigger for this project, you know. Let's take it to Australia. Let's also, because a lot of the older generation are passing away, and with them goes a lot. Even if you have the photograph, they would have had the information of who was there, what was on it, what was the day, and so on and so forth. You see, right. That's all important. The metadata, the description. So this is a brilliant way of getting in touch with people like you or others, who say, listen, but I have this story, would you be, you know? And in the same way as it interests me, I think it would interest a lot of people. So yes, that's great. Thank you for being here. I think we can be in touch. Again, we have just put up our website, magnazmin.com, MAGNAZMIEN, where there's our activities, the formats, what we do.
I'm there at the moment. Yeah.
Great. And there's you can even contact us through the website or just write to us on info@magnazmin.com, and we'll be in touch, because these are, I can just imagine what would have been on those. You see, SBS, as Andrew mentioned, was, they had radio and TV. They had programs going for a good number of years. I think now they've stopped most of the programs. I know SBS cut down a lot on its financing. And however, there are definitely archives there which probably belong to SBS Australia. This is exactly one of the reasons why we're meeting here today, because I'm sure there are stories like yours, which I think would be great to discover and to work on.
Great, thanks. I'll mute myself now. Cheerio.
Yeah, we'll be in touch.
And what's nice as well about something that obviously a lot of the stuff we like to do, we collect as much material as possible. But we always kind of have this idea of what kind of output could we have from this? Is this a particular collection that we want to do an exhibition with? Do we want to do a radio show? Do we want to do a video or whatever? But with the new website now, something we are doing is these stories where we just have a short sort of, maximum 500 words sort of narrative with some photos or with some audio, with some footage, to kind of, for example, in Lou's case, we could do a couple hundred words on who your father was and what his idea was, why he wanted to do that show. So, and we can do that for so many different people and different collections. And it's just to kind of draw attention to the fact that normal people have maybe done extraordinary things, or who have a particular story that we think is important. One of the stories we have on the website now is simply, we had an exhibition of photographs earlier this year, and someone recognized their grandfather in one of the photos, which is not unusual in Malta. I mean, this is not a complete surprise, but a few people actually came forward to say they recognized family members in the photos. And so one of the stories we have at the moment is simply a brief description of who this fisherman was and who his family were, and other people in his family, cousins and nieces, nephews, and so on, had given us some photos themselves that they have of him. So we just sort of fleshed out this person just a little bit, but it's just a taste to sort of say, this is the kind of connections that we're interested in. It doesn't have to be anything hugely significant, but it's just, look, this person was a member of this community 50 years ago, and there are still people alive who remember him and want to talk about him and their life at the time. So I think this is quite a nice thing that we can do quite regularly as well. So if people have even one or two photos and a story, we can do those kind of things, and that could be it for now, because like we say, it is kind of hard to engage with people abroad, particularly at the moment as well. It's not like we can even really travel, but this can be a way of kind of keeping connections and maybe sort of expanding these sort of networks, which is really important, I think.
It's amazing, Lou. You're just like exactly what they wanted to hear. I mean, it's like hitting, the jackpot. So glad that you participated and shared that you have these films and the history behind them. This is what I'm aiming to do here with this series, kind of like your dad, like kind of just bringing people from the community and giving them a platform to share. And in this global village, I feel like we have to kind of maybe go back down and get smaller again as a Maltese community and that's my aim with this. And I was just so thrilled to hear you share that with us. And I feel like we've already achieved something with you, Lou. Thank you. And I just wanted to know from Magna Zmien, you know, you're getting all these discoveries and people sharing these things with you. What's the bigger picture of all this? You know, you're taking little things and it feels like it's a quilt, you know, you keep adding things to it. And, you know, it's a mismatch, but it's coming together. You know, you have all these pieces coming, you know, from all these different directions, and then you're bringing them together. So what's the ultimate goal of this?
Okay. Yeah, so look, I think if we look back as to because we always have to keep a bit of the focus on what we're collecting and why, or is there a restriction on so there's a restriction on the formats that we can collect, number one. For example, like Andrew was saying, VHS is going into, video cassette is going into a different ballgame almost, because even though VHS is very vulnerable as a format and can disintegrate much faster sometimes than film, or even because it sticks and because there's a huge volume of material that got filmed in the 80s and particularly 90s as the video camera became even more accessible, and then digital, imagine that, or a few obscure formats in between those. So I think what we try to do is keep focus and keep an eye on that which is more at risk, and that which is more at risk are the early 20th century films and slides and photographs and audio recordings until the 50s, because that should be saved first, right? And that already gives us a lot of work. Clearly you're getting here, because the format is determining what we're capturing, if you like. It's going from 30s, late 30s mostly. There's 40s, there's a bit of 40s, there's a lot of 50s, a lot of 60s, a lot of 70s, into the 80s, right? And then we're not touching the digital world as to that's not within our scope. So again, I think we are basically, to answer your question a bit, we are basically starting to get an idea of what people documented. And you can see that there are different strata in society that acquired. So for example, it was an extremely important tool for the Anea and the musicians to record themselves. And to be able to record, to play to a machine, play it back. It was important in the development of music, but it was also important in the passing of the verses and the poetry, which they would give from one community to another. So for the musicians and the poets, it was very important. It was important for families to keep touch because they would send messages to each other before they had Skype or the phone, right? You had 60s particularly, it became one of the best tools to document family life, weddings, go to holidays, life at the beach, whatever, gatherings, people together. Then you get a lot of interesting stuff like aficionados, you know, collectors, or people just documenting a bit of everything. So they'd record stuff from the TV, they'd record stuff off the radio. You get political speeches, you get the political aficionados who would go and have recorded all the political speeches. So I think what we're starting to see is pretty much the scenario of what the Maltese have recorded in these decades, right? And we are, this whole project is still in the making. You know, it's got there's so many layers to it. It's just based on a simple action of trust, actually. Trust us with your content, we're not going to exploit it. We give you a digital copy and it goes on. Right, so we are definitely gathering, as Andrew said, quite a bit of content, and starting. And I think as we go along, we assess what to do with it, because we can't say, "Oh, we're going to get this content." It's only when stuff starts to come to and starts to come in, and even sometimes collections connect because you have a different photograph or a different angle from somebody else's collection of that same time and place, for example. So things start to develop once the content starts in, and we sit back usually and say, hey, look, this is coming in, it's just coming in this subject, and we don't have anything of that, and this is just coming in, this is new. So as we go along, we're assessing what to do with this and how to basically give value to it, by putting it out there, by writing stories, by giving importance to a little story online, you know, or something. The idea that when we use content on social media is not to exploit it, but to put it out there in a sensible way, which makes people look at it, question it, realize that they may have also another story. So you see, we are assessing as we go along. We don't know where this is going to go, but it's starting to grow. And I mean, I think the most important thing is that because also we are being trusted with people's content, is that there's the assurance of non-exploitation, that stuff is not used commercially. You know, we don't have that interest. But also, I think more importantly, is that we can assure them that there's going to be a longevity of the content if they're going to hand over to us to digitize, which means that we can guarantee that this is going to go on even after we're gone, because, you know, already the first step was setting up a foundation from a project. Now we're a registered foundation. We have got state funding to operate for the next 3 years. We're being given a studio because at least there's a recognition of the project. This is a first in Malta. There are similar projects going, I'm sure, in New York, in Toronto, and so many other places of grassroots, like collecting people's memories and family films. There's a lot out there. So I think what we need to guarantee is where the stuff is going to be accessed in the future as well, and how will it be accessed. You know, we have to guarantee that this stuff is going to be migrated from generation to generation. Otherwise, all is lost. What's the point if you're going to save it for 2 years, right? So the whole thing is still developing. And it's giving us lots of contents for great ideas, artistic, creative, social. I think there's a lot that can come out of it.
And I think as well, I think it's exactly what Andrew says. We're only now starting to see the trends within the collections. You know, like I said, we have 79 different collections now. We must have 20 or 30 different weddings, for example. You know, I always use weddings as a really good example here, because on its own, a wedding is only really interesting to the family, not even necessarily the children. I mean, but when you put all those weddings together and you start to look at them over time, what did a wedding look like in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s? How did people film it? How did they document it? The emergence in the late 80s, early 90s of the engagement video, where you'd have like this in Malta. I don't know if people are familiar, but there's these sort of scripted videos people started to do in the 90s, where, you know, the man would walk on the beach, bump into his future wife, and then, you know, take the ring out of a little rock pool or something. You know, there's these kind of stories. So when you put all of that stuff together and you start to see different examples, you start to see kind of these, from my background, these academic questions start coming up, like, well, why did that happen? Why did they start documenting their wedding in this way? Why do you always start a wedding, you know, the actual day of the wedding video with the woman looking in the mirror, brushing her hair? Why is that a thing? You know, so from one video or two videos, you might see it and think, oh, okay, it's just something that they did. But when you see it across 20 videos, you start to see that there's something significant happening here. These things might be known to anthropologists, but we have examples of them here in the collection. So the more material that as this mass of material builds up, more of these questions can be asked of it. And again, that's something that you can't look at anywhere else in Malta. There's no collections like this. I think long term, we've spoken to the National Archives here in Malta, and we have a sort of an agreement, not formalized, yes, but there is an agreement that the collection as a whole will be passed to the National Archives in the long run, not necessarily for them to use it as we're using it, but as a backup, as a security, and as if one day we do close down, then that material by law, because we're a foundation, has to go somewhere that would treat it in the same way as we would. And so that would, for us, naturally be the National Archives. So we do have a long-term plan to pass this material to other entities. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to be involved in this for as long as the other Andrew is interested in it as well. There's so much we can do with this. And there's so much material out there, even when digitization doesn't really become viable anymore. After the next 5 to 10 years, some of these formats are going to be too hard to digitize or too expensive, or our equipment will fail and we can't buy more. Even at that point, we will have this massive material that we can do an awful lot with for decades to come. So we do think this is a long-term project, regardless of even where we are. I mean, the idea will sort of live on, I think.
I had a question from Nikki Conti. She wanted to know, do you publish all the content or is it only with the owner's concession?
Should I do that one, Andrew? Or, every collection we have a consent form. We have like a generic consent form that we hand to every person that we have a collection from. So this gives us the right to use the material in projects, obviously within the remit of who we are. Not for profit. We are not sort of using any material for commercial gain. However, if we were to use this material commercially, or we were to sell prints or something of stuff, we would then enter into another agreement with the owners and make sure, okay, if there is money that's going to be made from any of this, that we agree they have a cut, or if they're not happy with that, then that's fine, we won't do it. So that kind of the commercial element we would reconsider. For the exhibitions we've done so far, there hasn't been a commercial element to them, but we have worked closely with the families or the people who have donated that material to make sure that, for one, we tell the story correctly. The two significant photographic exhibitions we had, one was of a photographer who passed away quite young in the 1970s, and his collection is nationally significant. I mean, he's an unknown photographer whose work is quite exceptional. So there's very much a sensitivity there that this is material that needs to be presented in the right way, and that his story needs to be presented carefully as well. He can't speak for himself. The other exhibition we had at the end of 2018 was of someone who had a photography studio, and he basically photographed everyone in Calcara from the 1940s to the 1980s. I mean, everyone had a photo by this guy. So we worked with his son. Again, he had passed away. So we worked with his son to make sure that the story was correct, and that the photos that we worked with were what he also agreed that they were suitable. So we very much try to do that kind of thing where we are doing a specific project based on a person or a particular collection. However, we also do, a couple of years ago, we did a number of collages where we would just pull different material based around material we received from certain localities in Malta. So we would collect stuff from Melilla, and then we would, one of our artists would created these video collages, and we had a sound artist would create a soundtrack based on that as well. And so for that, obviously, we didn't get permission from each person we used those clips from, but the consent form that they'd agreed to sort of allowed us to create it. We weren't spotlighting anyone, we were showing fragments of material, and so we created that. I mean, in those situations, it is down to us as an organization, it's down to this trust, this idea that we're not going to exploit the material we have, we're not going to use material that makes someone look stupid, or we have a responsibility to make sure that we do things ethically. And obviously, when material does come into our collections, we always give it. Obviously, we give it back to the donors as well. And in some cases, they've said, "Could you remove these, video footage of them in the bath as a baby or something?" And so, okay, yes, we'll cut this out. We won't keep this in the collection. That's fine. So we have this ongoing dialogue as well. So it's not about we take something, digitize it, give it back to you, and then we use it however we want. We will negotiate with those donors going forwards to make sure that whatever we do is with their consent, where possible. I don't know.
Thanks for replying. Yeah, that makes sense, because I was wondering about that part, because I don't think that was clear initially. But that makes sense, and that definitely gives peace of mind to whoever is at least thinking of becoming a donor. And also, I mean, through my family, I got to know that my relatives were also trusted with other people's photographs. So it even makes kind of certain cases more particular, if that makes sense. Yeah,
that's actually one of the tick boxes we have on the consent form is, do you have, along the lines of, do you have the right? Does everyone in your footage or in your photos give consent? Right. I mean, you have, that's where we would flag up, oh, okay, yes, we have material from someone else's collection, or this whole collection wasn't actually mine or from my family, but we were given it by someone else. So in those cases, we're at least aware that there might be some other stakeholders.
Yeah.
So if someone does come forward and say, hey, I don't like you using this material, first of all, that the donor is kind of protected in a way that they've already said, look, this isn't actually mine, but I inherited it, I bought it in a garage sale 20 years ago or something. But also then we're sort of aware that there might be a problem with this material. But so far in the past 3 years, no one's come back to say, no, you can't use this. That's usually happened at the point of initial contact, like, no, I don't want to give you this box, I'm not sure what's in this box. Or like I said, please cut this out because it's irrelevant, or I don't think I wanted it sharing. But these things will come up in the future. And I'm sure we will have issues in the future. All we can do is build up this trust that we said, and try and prove to people that we're not trying to exploit anything. And if we do something that's inappropriate, it's because we just weren't aware of that situation and it's not intentional. And we always try and be as careful as possible with whatever we use. Makes sense. Thanks for replying that.
Yeah, I back up Andrew on that. I think there's also this understanding and agreement. We give a service for free in exchange for use of your content. So this is basically what we're signing off. Yeah, that we digitize, we give you the service in exchange for use of the content. It's the use of the content within the remit of the Magna Zmien project, which is again research and artistic based activity. However, as Andrew mentioned as well, it's easily viewed as like, are you selling a concert? Are you selling a concert ticket? Where's the commercial? There's all these gray areas, even with legal ownership, like Andrew was saying. But the person in that picture from 40 years ago is still alive. Should they be seen? We've had this even in the exhibition. So yeah, it can get quite complicated. However, I think as long as there is always agreement, I've published stuff relating to musicians from the 1930s, but I did it in agreement with the family who didn't even know there were recordings. So I give them the recordings, we go into an agreement, and I say, I'll give you so many copies, because I'm not doing it not just for the money, but everybody will benefit from this. I think there's also this thing that's obviously, on one hand, as Carmen was saying earlier, everybody's happy to display stuff on Facebook and accepts that they have the rights to pull anything off Facebook. And at the same time, because it's a personal thing, we will hold on to a photograph and not share it, whereas it's most likely going to disintegrate in our hands. So we're also saying that by sharing, you're saving. And so when we do it for the right intentions, that's for the benefit of all, then it's a different story. See, I'm not going to say that there are clearly people say, no, but I want that photograph, I want to sell it, I want to print it in the book, I want to print it as a. If we're going to do that, then we've got to be in agreement. So I think that's always solves the problem, that you go into an agreement. If there's an objection, then we don't. There's just so much you can, you don't want to get stuck in legalities of or breaching legalities to I think it's more important to deliver and provide the longevity of the project.
I guess for you guys, everything revolves around sharing is preserving.
To some extent, yes. I think that's also the thing. We encourage people to make copies of what we give them and to give them to their siblings, their children, because USB gets lost. Digital files is also, digital content is still vulnerable. We relieve the content from the physical formats, which might be in some cases it's almost safer. They say that vinyl discs can last 100 years. We don't know if digital content can last 100 years. Clearly, most cases, I think, like going back, is the most important being those that lie on the riskiest formats, which are disintegrating fast, over which so much time has passed, which have mold on them, and that's the idea, because it's going to get harder and harder. It's going to get more expensive. I mean, even us in the past 2-3 years of operating, we find that same companies we were dealing with to buy a film scanner, is now not producing that scanner anymore 2 years after, and there isn't a market for it, and they won't have the parts and they won't have the service for you. So this is happening very fast. We're feeling the need to upgrade, but to upgrade to what? And sometimes we're just realizing we better hold on to what we've got and fix it, because we might not find another one. So there's many aspects to this project. We just one last thing is we also have people working with us. There's Margarita here, who is our project manager, is online with us, and we also have a couple of volunteers looking into the archive content, doing research. There's a guy who's listing the sound collection, putting a metadata description. There's another girl who's researching this aspect and fashion in the 50s, and so there's people looking into it as well. We've got a girl now, Christina, who's working with us, doing a great job on social media. So she's putting out these little stories. Yeah, and I think Carmen wants to say something.
Oh, we have 2 more people that want to ask a question. I have Claudia Caruana, who's going to ask, and then after her, I have Lou Fennick.
I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me? Hi there. I'm Claudia Caruana, live in New York. Some of you may know me from the Council of Maltese Living Abroad. I'm one of the U.S. representatives. And I think I've spoken with Indri in the past when I wrote about you and the music that you were doing, the music of the from the 30s or the 20s, okay, when I was doing a newsletter. My question to you is this any way involved with the Maltese immigrant experience and that museum in Malta? Are you working with them, or have you worked with them?
Your sound's off, man.
Yeah, okay. So no, we haven't been in touch with the Maltese Migration Museum. I have been there a few times. I found it, besides documents, I found it a bit hard to access content other than documents. Still, it's interesting. However, again, you see, it would be great if there was an effort, a bit of a collective effort here to start to collect and digitize before things are lost, even through the migration, the Commission of Migration and the Immigration Museum in Valletta. But sometimes we have to keep a bit of focus on what our main activity is, because you see, we're happy to work with institutions to some extent, but we'd rather work with individuals who have personal collections, because those, again, are neglected, are given least importance. Now, with the case of the Migration Museum, again, I haven't worked with them, and I wonder, maybe you can tell us more.
I think we lost connection with her.
Okay.
I had also spoken with them a couple of years ago, actually. Actually, it could have been just before we started Magna Zmien, or around the same time. They have quite a lot of material, but at that point they were just installing some sort of touchscreen displays to show some of their material. And they were really, it was operated by volunteers. As so often is the case with these places, they're just not well enough funded to really to operate independently. So they were open, I think, maybe one or 2 days a week. The work that they were doing when I was there was fantastic. I mean, they were going through a lot of passport documents that they got from various places. They have a huge amount of material there. It is mostly documents. Obviously, there's I mean, I'd spoken specifically about what kind of audiovisual material they held, and they don't really have anything other than photographs within passports. So as far as the material, it doesn't really cross over. However, they will have documents about ship and passenger registers. I think from the post-war period, I think from the 50s onwards, they have stuff. So there's definitely ways to sort of link it together. But as you say, it's about, well, what exactly can we do to help better, both? Can we furnish photographs to particular stories? Do we have photos of a lot of the ships? I mean, we do have photos of quite a lot of the migrant ships in the 50s and 60s. So that kind of thing could work. But at the moment, I mean, as you know, it is just down to capacity. How many projects can we take on at any one time? But no, I think she's right. I think we should follow up with them and see where they're at now. 2 years on after I last spoke to them, at least.
I think we lost Claudia.
Yeah, Claudia, I checked in, seems like she's off. So Lou Fennick wanted to ask another question.
Thank you. I hope neither of you are averse to silly questions, but I have one here. Have you noticed an increase in, I guess one could say, eye traffic at your website, or perhaps people reaching out to you, particularly from the United States, given the spectacular rise of someone ethnically Maltese in the American political system? And of course, I'm speaking of Pete Buttigieg here. Would you guys have any idea of that? Because, I mean, God knows the number of times I've been asked, at least, how do you pronounce his name correctly?
Andrew?
Me, I've not noticed any particular increase in traffic, but then I'm not sure up until this year whether we've had much of a reach beyond Malta. Obviously, because of the nature of what we do, as far as the physical digitization aspect, it's limited to Malta and Gozo. So as far as the types of people we've been reaching out to, they tended to have been local. The material that we've got from abroad has come in by people, like, for example, like Carmen, who would come to Malta anyway and was aware of what we were doing before. But I'm not entirely sure how Carmen came across us in the first place, for example. But I think this is one of the areas we're really wanting to push this year, next year, to increase this internationalization, because there's more material. I mean, both me and Andrew and Margarita have worked abroad with Maltese communities, and there is so much material over there. but how do we access it? Other than us going there and doing stuff and bringing it back, how can we productively engage with that without, you know, undermining or diminishing what we're doing here in Malta? Because in other countries, we do feel there are more, you have more opportunities in America to digitize material, even just from that basic element. It's cheaper to do it where you are than anywhere in Malta. All the equipment, most of the equipment that we have here, I've brought back from abroad. I've gone back to England, for example, and brought stuff back in my suitcase because we just can't get good quality equipment here in Malta. So we've always focused very much on Malta as the main base. But now that we've kind of got this momentum, now is the time when we're starting to look internationally. I will look over the past few months to see if we had some spikes. Maybe I'll sort of link it to some like late night interviews with him or something on, you know, the late night shows to see if then we found a corresponding jumper. I'm not sure. I can certainly look through the Facebook's followers, for example. That could give us a clue.
So
Thank you.
to say how I found Magna Zmien. I think I was on Facebook and I was looking for something that had to do with Maltese Carnival. And I think you had a clip from your very beginnings of a black and white where people were dressed with devil masks, I believe. And I was so intrigued by this very, you know, brief moment of a blast from the past. And I said, who put this up? Who did this? How did they get this? Where did it come from? I mean, all these questions flooded me. And so I myself, I'm always researching. So I delved deeper and deeper to find out and track it down. And that's how I found Magna Zmien, from that one little clip of Carnival.
That clip is actually a very short clip by the grandfather of a friend of ours, Valletta. His grandfather was, or his great uncle, I can't remember right now, was Alfred Valletta, who was a well-known filmmaker, and he had this even on his own production company, Vela Films, and he did some short movies, and this was like Carnival 1939. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff. There you find amateur filmmakers, there's some certain pro photographers. There was the Malta Cine Club, for example, in the 60s. 70s, where you had amateurs, and then it spawned a number of amateur filmmakers, for example, with Cine 8s and Super 8s. It's all interesting, you know. We're interested to see what people did with technology. It's like taking snippets of the past and trying to see what we can do with all of this together, you know, and reshape and reform it into something which we somehow all have a bit of memory. We can all relate to in some way or another. There's an element of that, and we can all relate to that, like running on the beach and you know, Lihar Goza, for example. There's a piece of us in every part of those little collages. That's why they work, because even though there's secondary image, split image, secondary seconds of images, there's something we can relate to in all of them that can't see it. It's just, I guess, putting it all together in a collage is all about that, you know. So we're going to reform something new, revalidate all of that. So sometimes there's a totally artistic way of doing it, and then in some ways it's in the form of an exhibition. Sometimes it's so yeah, it's interesting because there's a whole array of people who contribute to different things. We're discovering people, photographers, and unknown people who did really interesting things or would have documented that by chance. So it's a great story altogether in itself.
So I wanted to touch upon, since we're abroad and maybe many of us were born and raised here, and our family who migrated here, a lot of their footage might be exclusive to that country they immigrated to. Is that content relevant to you? Does it have to be Malta and Gozo, or can it be Maltese people in their community here and how they've evolved. Like you touched upon, Andrew, weddings. Like my parents, I think I had a film of when they got married, and they didn't have a big reception or anything. They went back to a tiny little Chelsea apartment on a walk up, and that was their wedding reception, just with, you know, the wedding party. You know, it wasn't this elaborate wedding. So compared to what they would have had if they were in Malta, the contrast, of, downsizing their wedding, no extended family. It's only your immediate family here, whoever came here, and maybe a Maltese person, but you're connected with them because they're Maltese. So they were part of that film footage. So is that significant also to you? Or does it just have to be Gozo and Malta? Or, like I said, the experience of the Maltese migrant where they've moved to?
Clearly, we are interested in the experience of where the Maltese migrant moved to. I think it is, the idea is to collect all of that which is local, related to Malta and its environs, but also the memories of the diaspora and what the lives they created for themselves. So if it's your mom in New York, and how they lived in these new places, the reasons for it says a lot of how they lived when they migrated, how they kept in touch, what they did, how they kept in touch with the communities and their families back home, what kind of life they had there, and then what they, when they came back. So clearly, definitely we are. In fact, there's some people who give us collections. So we're not interested in people's holidays to London. If you're just going on holiday, really, and you're taking pictures of the Alps because it's your skiing holiday. That's not interesting to us. But we're interested in how people lived when they moved away and lived elsewhere, because that says a lot, even though it's not Malta, it's the Maltese and their memories.
And also, I think what's interesting about migration is that in the era that we mostly find materials, so again, post-war, up to sort of the 80s, 90s, there are different waves of migration, different reasons for going. Those who left straight after the Second World War in the late 40s, early 50s, the actual journey was, by ship. So even that story of how you get somewhere, that sense of distance is very different to when my dad left Malta in 1970 and got on a plane and came to London. So what's the experience of a Maltese 20-year-old in London, who by the 1970s, you could get a plane back. If you didn't like it, you'd come back. Those who went 10, 15 years earlier had a very different experience. To get back home was much harder. And we know from speaking with people as well that not everyone enjoyed themselves. This idea of, oh, we went to Australia and we became happier, we're wealthier and everything. But that's kind of looking at the big picture. 50 years looking backwards, yes, we've made a good life for ourselves, but what were those first 10, 20 years like, where you were there on your own and you couldn't speak English? How did you communicate? How did you buy stuff in the supermarket in the 1950s if you couldn't speak English and you're in Toronto? So I think those kind of reevaluations of what the migrant experience was, I think, is captured in how does the wedding look? Would the parents of the people who were married in New York have seen that wedding and thought, oh, this isn't what it should be. It should be big. It should be everyone. Why isn't all the family there? What were those reactions? And how does that impact you as a young person abroad? How does that make you? Do you identify more with the place you are in than with Malta? And I think this is where we're at now, where a lot of sort of second generation or later generation Maltese abroad, they might not even identify as Maltese at all. There's no recognition because it just wasn't something that was ingrained in them because the community wasn't strong enough. So all of this stuff is really interesting and is really important to capture. So it's not just you know, the general story of, yes, we emigrated and we're now retired and we're happy. You know, there's getting to that point, I think, was, and a lot of people returned. We have this story we recently have actually online about one person who went to Australia, didn't like it at all, and became a stowaway and came back to Malta by a very circuitous route because he just couldn't handle it. He didn't want to be there. And I think that's important to tell as well. You know, not everyone enjoyed the experience.
I have a special guest here. Come here. Take your mask off. Take your mask off. Just say hello.
Hello.
This is Georgia. She's the one that her mother was speaking on the film. She has
Hi,
no
Georgia.
idea what's going on. She doesn't understand this.
Tell her I'm in Shatlahamar. I see them.
They're in Gozo in Malta, so we're having a talk. We're having a talk about films.
About whom?
About films.
Film.
Yes.
I'm not finding you.
She's doing the very typical Maltese. Who are they? Where are they from? Where did they? What's their nickname? So I'm filming. Okay. So it's a classic example. She's been here since the 60s, but still the nuances of where she came from are clearly there.
Great.
But I just wanted to continue on and end on this note is being here and having connected with you and being part of your project. And I really believe in this. How do we get more people to understand and become a part of this and realize why this is so important to our heritage and to our identity, especially like you said, we're here, and maybe the third generation might not even feel Maltese, but that they should understand they should, and it's a very big part of them. And what you're doing is trying to preserve that and enhance it in another way through your artistic endeavors.
Sorry, I have what's the question exactly that you're asking?
So through your project, and to get people to really understand and contribute to this, the importance of it and how you're enhancing what is given to you through your artistic projects, and to really grasp and realize the importance. This is really for your Maltese heritage and preserving it in a
well, look,
way.
I think there's a difference between the first generation who would have been there, for example, and for example your kids, who don't know these formats as such, but they would only appreciate it once they see the film of you as a little girl. See, that's when they go, we got a film of mom as a little girl, and look what we can do with this. Or, hey, mom, or then they would be interested in knowing what's on it. If they, so you see, these things are usually neglected by the older generation because they don't know what to do with them. The younger generation would know they're even there, or even what's on it and how precious it is. So it's a bit of it gets lost a bit in that situation. So I would have liked to tell people to kind of, like Luke here, come forward and say, look, I have this. And maybe this could be the start of people from the diaspora in New York, the Maltese Community Center, coming forward and saying, listen, we'd like to, we are happy to, from here, provide advice or consultation as to what you can do. How to preserve it, how to collect it. And if you would like to contribute it, even once you've got it digitized, we will give you standards, for example, of how you can upload that content to our service so that it is there for safe keeping, right? So I think this could be an interesting way to go, because I think it would be great to have something like this happening as an ongoing activity through the Maltese Community Center, for example, that you, even with a couple of scanners and somebody a few hours a week, that people can go in and drop off images and give their descriptions and the stories that go with them and the memories that go with them, because then we're all, you know, we get a bit from here and a bit from there. But it's a great way of keeping in touch and of passing them on. Because that's the kind of activity I would like to be doing if I came to New York or if I went to Australia with the Maltese communities. How can we help to save that stuff? Because we would also like to see it and we want to hear it. So maybe this is the start of the contact. You know, I think it is a great start for the. We know the situation brought us together because we wouldn't have come up with this. We'd be finding ways of how we can get the money to fly over to New York. Whereas we can talk and discuss anytime. From time to time, we can bring up these subjects and see how we can help out.
Yes, I definitely want to develop on this more, and you know, like I said, bring the Maltese community here in New York and the Maltese community across America, and also in Canada, who we do have a very good relationship with the Maltese community there, and kind of come together to contribute to this on a larger scale. And like you said, it is something in development. It's something in its, you know, very early stages. And through this platform, I do hope that we will be able to contribute, as you are saying, you know, with photos, which is a more manageable thing, and then see how we can go into, you know, different formats like film and other ways.
Film and sound is a bit more complicated, you know.
Yeah.
But at least still image can be done quite easily, very straightforward. Yeah.
Well, you know, when travel comes back, someone could just put a few in there. That's how I brought mine down. I spread them out and threw my suitcase and brought the films down.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how I got them there.
Yeah, well, here we're doing time travel, yeah?
Exactly. Yes, we are.
The time machine.
All right. I'm not sure if anyone else has any other questions. Thank you for everyone who participated. And this will also, the recording will also be available on YouTube. And I look forward to doing more of these series and having Magna Zmien again in the near future as we develop this collaboration with them. And we can always be reached through our website as well, www.themaltesecenter.com. And you can also reach Magna Zmien at www.magnazmien.com. And we're all, both of us, available on all social media platforms. So there's no excuse that you can't get in touch with us, and we're both very responsive on both ends. If Andrew and Indiri have anything else to say.
No, I'd like to thank you for coming up with this initiative. I think it's great. It's a great start. I'd like to thank Lou for coming forward and making contact with us and offering to discuss about your collection. We're very happy to do that. And also Anita and Nikki, thank you for showing up. Yeah, if you spread the word, we'll be happy to be in touch. And Lou, we will definitely be in contact. We'll send you an email and we'll take it from there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. This will be the last series for the holiday season. I'm going to take a break and I'll see everyone back in the new year. I wish everybody a Merry Christmas. I'm going to
Happy Christmas.
Il-Milayat.
Tayyip.
I'm making an effort. And I wish everyone the best, and hopefully 2021 will be better.
See the Gozo.
Take,
Look, see the Gozo, hopefully.
yes, yes, we all miss it very, very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Cheerio.
Ciao.
Thank
Good night.
you.